they're looking for edgy writing that has a reasonably, has a moral worldview, a decent worldview. And so I'm a very edgy writer. And I'm like, they like my writing because I'm kind of edgy. I'm on the edge of what, But the point is that the ideas I give them are fresh. And that's the point, you see. So if you can think of something weird, and you can write a really good novel around it, your chance of getting it published and having someone excited about it is a lot higher than writing the typical romance, Lotus Buster or whatever that is. Anyway, you know what I'm talking about. How about this one? A man forfeits his life for honor but has it returned. That is the theme of The Fox's Honor. This is a published novel. So, a man gives up his life for honor and then has it returned to him. What an interesting theme question, different theme question. So in any case, you gotta have something unique and that's your theme. My approach is to start with a scene, that's what I said, the beginning scene, right, and build from it. So I use an outline based in scenes. I write each scene in order to build the plot, the storyline, and the theme, and the scenes together turn into chapters, which becomes a novel. I know this, this sounds simple. It's probably not as simple as I'm making it out, but you can see how this works, right? A beginning scene, then you have your rising action with your outline based in scenes, and you should outline something. I really get irritated about authors, and I bet you do too. They're writing and you wonder where they're going, and you have no clue where they're going. And you don't think that, sometimes as a writer, okay, when I was just a reader, sometimes I could buy it. But as a writer, I know they're lost. I know they have no idea where they're going. And then all of a sudden they find out where they're going. And they're doing that because a lot of these are bestsellers, right? I've read bestsellers like this, and their publishers keep publishing them. They got lucky once. So let's not do that. Let's not get lucky once. Let's get lucky every time by basically, working on our outline based in scenes so we know where we're going. Like I said, if you know what your climax is, right, you can't get lost. You can't get lost. And by the way, should you ever have an extraneous scene in a novel? Never. In my opinion, and I read a lot about this, you should never have an extraneous word. You should never have an extraneous statement. You should never have an extraneous conversation. Every single word in that novel should go forward, make the story, the plot, and the theme move forward. If they don't, pull it out. It's a very important thing in my opinion. So anyway, the scenes, let's see this. I'm going to give it more detail. As impossible, like I said, to tell you everything you need to know to write a scene. There's a lot of writing on this, but this is how I write the scene. This is how I do it. I always have an input, events in the scene, and an output. That's for every scene. So do you see how this is? I have an input and output. So if I have a beginning scene, the beginning scene has an implied input, right? But it jumps into the action. You have some beginning sentence or paragraph or something that jumps you into the action. That scene, the events, have some excitement in them. And then you have an output of that scene. The output becomes the input for the next scene. Do you see this? You can't stop. If you do it this way, you can't stop. Because you have the implied input to an event, to an output. That output becomes your next input, which then you have an event, then you have another output, which becomes your next input. And if you're driving to your climax, you're writing, I can't write your novel for you, right? I can't put those words that make up that scene, the input, the event, and the output. But guess what? If you're writing this way, you always have an input to the next scene. You always have an output to the next scene. You won't stop. You won't hang up. Because like I said, even if you hang up because you can't imagine what the event should be, what should you do? Just write. because you know what the output's going to be next, right? And if you have your scene outline kind of written down, or in your mind. I usually do mine in my mind. I don't write down, I'm going to do this and this and this exactly. I like to have it kind of in my mind. And so each scene has input, output, and drives to that climax. So this way, you can't get hung up. Because even if you write a terrible scene, what can you go back and do? Edit and fix it, right? And if you're not editing and fixing it, you're not doing the right thing anyway. So that, we know that, right? In any case, you have to have an end with a potential transition to the next scene. And I'm not going into great detail about that, but sometimes transitions are their own little scenes, but that's another whole scope. So the input is driven by the previous scene transition or by another earlier scene transition, because your scenes don't have to be back to back. Sometimes, and a lot of writers, and I write myself, I have a scene that conveys the main character, and then I may have a drop scene that is in a different track with other characters. Sometimes I write that way. But guess what? Your input and outputs all fit within a transition, because you may start another scene from an earlier transition or an earlier output, right? But they all track together that way. When you start doing scenes that are not necessarily in a cohesive order, there's nothing wrong with that, but that's an advanced writing technique. You know what I'm saying? So, a normative novel, just a normative novel is going to go scene, 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 climax, and so on. But, you can write novels where you have different tracks, or you move differently. But that's okay. That's a little more advanced technique. I'm not going to get into that. So to start your novel, your first scene has to have an implied or explained transition from the imagined scene before. And guess what? Many times you go back and you'll fill in the reason, but a lot of times you don't have to. Some of it's self-explanatory. That's novel setting. I'm going to talk about setting. You have to have a why. You have to have a why. This is getting into scene setting and novel setting. At the point, you got to detail the first scene. I'm not going to get into details. I'm just going to talk about generics, but the input is the why of the scene. That's always the input, is the why. So the why is necessary. It's the most important, but the most important part is the what. So, like I said, your why is, the input to the scene is really the why. Why is this scene occurring? And so the beginning scene, you have an implied why. All the other scenes, you don't have implied whys, right? Because they flow from the output to become an input from the next scene. Makes it very simple. But the most important part of the scene is the what. The what is the events in the scene. And so in your scenes, you have input, events, and output. That's every scene. The what of the scene is what happens to entertain the reader and drive the plot. Now, most of the time, when somebody's sitting up here talking about novels, they'll tell you what? The what of the scene is to drive the plot. Look, guys, you can drive the plot all you want, but if your reader is not entertained, do you think they're going to keep reading? To me, the most important thing in writing is I want to entertain my readers. Now, I'm not going to mess my plot up. I'm not going to mess the storyline, and I'm not going to mess up my theme because I'm entertaining my readers. But every single scene I write has to have a what, a excitement in it. As a matter of fact, if you don't feel excited about writing your next scene, what do you think your reader's going to think? Right? They're going to go,
"Let it down, go to bed."
Yeah, The point is that if you're excited about the scene, if you have a what, the focus, the subject of that scene is exciting to you. And guess what I told you? Every scene has what? Something exciting that is happening in it. Even if it's a placid conversational scene. Because otherwise, do you need to tell your readers about it? No. Don't tell your readers about it if it's not exciting. Right? There's no need for it. And if you can take it out of a novel, take it out of a novel. You don't need it. In any case, the what can be an event, a revelation, a conversation, an adventure, a joke. It just has to be exciting. If it's not exciting, think of something. What I do is generally, I've written this novel, I'd love to have it published. It is really cute. It's about a couple of girls in a Anglican school, parochial school. And they are constantly, they were born and raised in Burma, but they're from missionary kids. But they have no idea what it's like to live in England, in London, at a parochial school, an Anglican parochial school, right? Can you imagine the scenes that you can write of excitement with that kind of event, right? I mean, you can imagine that their whole idea of the world is different than the people that they're surrounded with. And all those prim little girls wearing their little petticoats, you know, sitting at the table and eating with their knives and forks are going to be really surprised when one of those girls reaches over and picks up her rice with her bare hand and slams it into her mouth, right? You can see this already. That's what I'm talking about. Even a simple thing like that can become an action-oriented in a scene that drives your story, plot, and theme. Just depends on what you want to drive it, how you want to drive it, and where you want to go to. But you've got to put your mind, your writer's mind, is not a mind of just writing. It's a mind of what kind of excitement can I put down on the paper for my reader. So that's why my first rule is keep your reader entertained. The what? This is the most important, entertaining to the reader. It should have emotion and excitement. It must draw emotion and excitement. If it doesn't make your reader's heart beat faster, or make them want to cry, or make them want to get angry, if you're not invoking something in that scene, then it's really not worthwhile. The scene, you show the reader what's going on, but at the same time you reveal important information from the plot and theme of the novel. So this is how that all ties together. Remember, each of the scenes is part of the story, which becomes part of the plot, which becomes part of the theme. So in that, you are driving this because of what's the important. So, like I said, the most important thing to me is to entertain my reader, and the scene is the mode I employ. Every scene is like a little piece of excitement that drives that plot and story and theme, period. And like I said, it's got to be entertaining. That's a critical thing. We've got to set the scene for your readers. This is a thing, events description. I really get irritated about this. Let me talk about this. Let's see where I want to get to. A lot of times, in a lot of modern novels I've read, the writers never describe the characters. They don't describe where they are, the place. How can you set a scene if you don't know where they are? For example, if you go and look in a theater and you're going to see a play, in the theater you look and you see that the theater scene is set. So when you look at it, you see, you know, there's, for example, tables and chairs, and maybe implements and furniture and things in a room. And then what happens? The characters come on the stage and you see them, and you see their faces, you see the way they're dressed, the way they look. And then the play begins. But guess what? The play can't begin unless you know what the scene is, what the setting of the scene is. So what I advise, and this is Arlo Guthrie. I don't know if you read Arlo Guthrie Jr.'s advice. He's wrote The Field Guide to Fiction Writing. I think he's a great source. A lot of other writers write about this. You know, the show don't tell, I'll talk about that too. But the big thing to me and to Arlo Guthrie was you got to give at least 100 to 300 words where you describe the place. And whenever you introduce a new character, especially an important character, you need to give 100 to 300 words. Now, if it's an unimportant character, or just, you know, a throw-off character, you don't need to do that. But if you're introducing a main character or a secondary character, you always need to give at least 100 to 300 words to describe them, and you need to describe your place. Now, you can do this. I as a technique, like to do it at the beginning of a scene, and of a chapter, and of a novel. Because to me, in my writing technique, I generally want to do like a stage play. I want to set the stage for you with the characters and the people, and then let them begin to do their action on that stage. That's the way I kind of view it. I don't like to think of it as screenplays. Maybe as a drama is better, but you see what I'm saying? So you can do this. Other writers have other techniques of the way that they employ this. But let me tell you, one of the biggest review items that I give to most authors when I'm reviewing their works is, I don't think your description is sufficient.